DHG doing my final review for Remnant 2. Now, I'm putting this review out long after I had started the game and then finished it and released the last of my videos because I do something I normally don't do in reviews. I critique the game and where it needs to improve, and then I try to offer solutions. I've never done that before, so I had to sit there and think about where I really think this game needs to improve, and more than just criticize it, give them a way that they can improve it. We're going to start off like we normally do with pluses, minuses, and things that fall into the subjective category. Now, where I think the game can be improved, that all falls into the subjective category. Starting off with the pluses here. It has some very interesting levels and bosses and NPCs. Yeah, a lot of the bosses, let me see if I could find one here. Yeah, this chick was pretty cool. You run into a lot of interesting characters throughout the game. Some of the bosses, I can't remember the name of them. The Red Prince or something like that. I had a hell of a time defeating that guy, but he was certainly interesting. And then there was this guy. Oh, before I get to the guy that I thought was really cool, I'm going to get to one of the bosses, or there's numerous occasions of this throughout the game. Bosses that I just thought were very poorly designed, like this Labyrinth Sentinel here. This thing was terrible. Here he is. Taurotha. Now this guy, I don't think you have to fight him. He's an optional boss. But I decided to fight him anyway, you know, because why not? I want to see as much of the game as I can during my playthrough so I can give it the best possible rating. And he was well worth a fight. He was pretty interesting. He reminded me of one of the bosses from Bloodborne. I can't remember what the guy's name was, but he was the dude you drop down into the ocean to fight. He reminded me of him. The game gets better with time. I didn't think it started off very well for numerous reasons, but by the time I was done with the game, I was considering giving it a second playthrough, but I've got other things to play, other things I want to review and put new content out, so second playthrough would have been something I had done. Male and female options in the character screen. This was very important because this gets into the whole Gamergate thing with cultural Marxism and wokeism. They're the same thing, just different names for the same destructive ideology, theology, whatever you want to call it, because Marxism in a nutshell is largely an unoriginal idea. It goes back to Gnosticism, all this crap. It is basically destroy everything, rebuild, destroy everything, rebuild. And part of the destruction is destroying what it means to be a man, destroying what it means to be a woman. There's numerous ways to do this, pitting people against one another, you know, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. While being a fight between the common man and the elite is a thing, they do it in a very destructive, dismissive way within this ideology. It's very perverse. And I'm happy to see that a developer, Gunfire Games, actually didn't do what a lot of developers were doing, like Wulong, where they have body type 1, body type 2. No, here you have male and female, as it should be. You get some really cool stuff to unlock, mainly for your weapons. You also get some pretty cool special abilities too. Like if you look at the lower right hand side of the screen, you'll see the different weapon functions you can have. It's kind of like a secondary fire type thing, but you can buy some of these. Most of them, it's just like a Souls game, since it is Souls-like. You get them from defeating bosses, but it gives you a bunch of really cool abilities you can use from so many things, different classes of characters, which I'll get into, but there's a lot of variation, a lot of cool stuff you can pick up. Lots of variation in builds, I just mentioned this. Yeah, as it was with the first Remnant, there's numerous ways you can play this game. Since I thought I was going to be playing most of this single player, depending on how the community can be, like if you get good people in the game that actually stick around and help you out and don't just rush through everything like some Souls players do, you don't really get to explore the maps. You have to come back and go through them again, but I found the community in my playthrough to be pretty good for playing with randoms. But you can vary your build to help the team out in pretty much any way you want. And there's a lot of different builds available to you. And as I already touched upon, the game's got fun co-op, and it's got good matchmaking. That's key. when this Souls series first started out back with Demon Souls and Dark Souls after that, it wasn't until Dark Souls 2 that matchmaking actually became fairly workable and reliable, but in the first two Souls games, it sucked. And there's been a lot of other Souls games I've played since then that also had bad matchmaking. Maybe it's just the nature of the beast, I don't know, but this game, you could get into co-op games reliably, you could have people join your game reliably. It was very easy. There's some very good maps. You're looking at one of them. I love this area. There's a couple different areas that I thought were really cool, but there was also some that I thought just sucked horribly, like these areas. I had another area in mind. I don't know if I have any footage of it, but this area was very dull, very bland. I guess they got what they were going for, like an otherworldly look. They certainly accomplished that, but it doesn't make it nice to look at. Let's see if I can find the other level I had in mind. Oh, here we are. I just didn't think the area was very appealing. There was too much of the same color around. That was probably the point, but there was another area just like this that I didn't get on film, which was primarily, it's right in the beginning of the game. I think a lot of your best looking areas should be earlier on in the game to pull people in. And if you want to put some levels that you thought were kind of meh, put them somewhere near the middle. The game had challenging enemies. Challenging in both the right way and the wrong way. And it's not just bosses either. Like these guys, these are, I guess you could call them supers or elites. I remember this specific part of the game. I even had a co-op partner. Yeah, he's in the upper right or upper left there. We had such a hard time trying to dispatch both these assholes. But sometimes these elites, depending on what modifiers they have, can be extremely difficult. And then there's the actual bosses. And then there were guys like this, and like I said, the Red Prince, I think he was called. But the Red Prince was also an optional fight. Like this dude, the Red Prince, they were optional. They were great bosses. But there were also some within the storyline that were very cool too. I can't remember their names though. But you got a great deal of challenging enemies. I would argue some that are challenging in the kind of bullshit realm, but some were also a challenge of your skill, as it should be. And now I'm going to be getting into ways that I think that the game could be improved, and I'm going to have to pull up some old footage of mine to reference another game. Alright, some might recognize this. This could be a better Souls-like shooter because that is the idea behind the game. Remnant 2 is designed to be a Souls game, but based upon firearms. Now what they did is admirable. It's uncharted territory, something that no developer, as far as I know, has tried to do yet. So they're in uncharted waters and they can chart their own path here. And where I think they need to look for a little bit of inspiration is what you're seeing right here, which was another developer, Housemarque, that Returnal was kind of like a concept. Whereas Remnant is not much different. So what if you try to make a bullet hell game and turn it, into a third-person shooter perspective? Whereas Remnant is what if you take a Souls game and try to base it off of firearms? Remnant 2 could learn from Returnal. And why that is, let me see if I could find an action scene here. The action's very fast-paced, and the aiming is really good. This was one of the main problems I had with Remnant, because it was a Souls-based shooter game. It would be like if you had a Souls game with extremely clunky melee combat. You can't have your fundamental game mechanic to be flawed. It has to be perfect. And Remnant can learn something from Returnal just by how the game handles its aiming. Is very precise. You don't have to rely on a lock-on like Remnant does, where you press down on the left trigger and it locks in on the target. You have to do that a little bit too much. It would be better if there was more precise free aim. Also, I think that, now there's already some of this in Remnant, but you could add more bullet hell-like things to the game since it is a Souls game. Bullet hell is not, let's just say, unheard of. Souls games have done it. Not to like extreme degrees, but it's there. And you just saw a little bit of it in Returnal here, but Returnal was built around that. I'm saying they could add a little bit more of the bullet hell type features where you're dodging different projectiles and all that. But if you do that, you can't have the same movement mechanics you have in your regular Souls game, which is going to bring me on to a next point here. Player movement should be similar to Bloodborne, not your typical Souls game. Movement in Remnant is slow and sloppy, to say the least. It's like two old people doing it, slow and sloppy. What they could do, and this is going to blend in with the other things that I have to say about how they could improve the game, is they need to make the movement more precise. Much more precise. Look towards Bloodborne for inspiration with their quick. You don't exactly have to have a dash, but make the movement much more fluid and base the game around dodging the projectiles and melee attacks, but with fluid motion. Bosses and enemies must be designed around firearm-based combat, not melee. I mean, I think that goes without saying for Remnant here, because it is a firearms-based game, but a lot of the bosses and enemies, I felt, weren't really based entirely around firearms-based combat. And we're going to get into melee in here. That's my final thing here. So I hope I'm being coherent in what I'm trying to say, because it's hard to critique a game while giving them ways in which you think they could improve, and actually conveying that message accurately and articulately. But bosses must be designed around firearm combat, because that is what Remnant is supposed to be, a firearms-based Souls-like game. I don't even think melee combat should be in it, and every single enemy that they design should have firearms in mind, and the different firearms that are in the game. How can you dodge this? How can you make this an effective, tight, tense fight? And to my last, as I mentioned melee combat, I personally don't think there should be melee options in this game at all. Just kind of like how Bloodborne removed blocking and shields. Well, they did give you a shield, but to troll you. I don't think there should be any melee here, period. And if you do have to have some sort of melee function, I think it would be a good idea to give the character away, since this is firearm-based, to knock the opponent back temporarily. What the cooldown time on something like this should be, playtest it, figure it out. But just knock the enemy back, even bosses, but to a lesser degree, just to give the character enough time to get back to the firearms and their tools, so that they can continue with the combat in a firearm-based way that this game is supposed to be. Focus more on the firearms. I would just say remove melee combat altogether. Just get rid of it. It's sloppy as shit. You can't have a lock-on like you do in the Souls games. You know, when you press down on the right thumbstick to lock on and your target and focus directly on that. You can't have that here, because then you'll just have auto-aim with firearms. It'll make the whole game too easy. And we're going to get into the negatives now. I don't know if I should put negatives first or last. Sometimes they can be more interesting. Cutscenes in the story were generally, not saying all of it, but generally uninteresting. I started listening to it in the beginning, it didn't resonate with me. I thought the story was crap. I didn't like the story in the first game either, so I wasn't expecting much here. I was all here for the gameplay. But you could improve on it, or I would say, if you want to have like a story within these types of games, just do what the Souls games do. Make it very, I would almost say, nonchalant. It's not really in your face. There's not a whole lot of cutscenes, and if you do, it's very brief, it's very cinematic, and it's straight to the point. There was a whole lot of needless talking in this game. Quite frankly, uninteresting talking. Now, you can make the argument that, well, that just builds, character development and all that, but, if you're not interested in that character, it's just empty talk like I thought it was. I mean, if you want to leave that in the game, that's fine, but just my thoughts, feelings, and opinions. I think it was near the end of the game when I finally figured out how to read these maps 100% correctly, with areas you've already been to, areas where you need to go, items lying around. I think they could have done a better job earlier on in the game with explaining the map to you, not in a real hand-holding kind of way, but either just make the features of the map a lot more easily apparent to the player. Because, you know, by the time I got near the end of the game, I finally figured the map layout and how they have all the symbols and the information that they're trying to convey to you, the player. By the time I figured all that out, I had already almost beaten the game. So I thought, how much of it did I miss earlier on? The game's got pretty poor performance. I've got some pretty beefy hardware in my rig, so it's not my rig that's going to be giving me problems. It's some games just are able to maintain a steady, silky smooth frame rate. Some games aren't. I think there could have been a little bit more technical polish here to smooth out the frame rate, because when I always look at how much my GPU, CPU, and my system resources are being stressed, trying to figure out, you know, how I can smooth out the gameplay a bit more. But when I was getting like 48 frames per second in some instances in this game, my CPU was only running at like 70%. Nothing was even close to being maxed out. So it wasn't my hardware. Smooth that out a little bit more, you're good. I thought the graphics were mostly meh. Some areas did look very good though. The character models looked alright, but the environments in the background, they weren't really my flavor. And from the technical standpoint, if you want to look at how the graphics are actually conveying the image, I think games like Helldivers 2, pretty much a lot of games, just had a better graphical presentation than this. At certain points, and I think at this game's worst, it looks like it would have been right at home on the PS4, or with the last generation games. Now, there was more going on from the technical standpoint in this one, but the overall package was a bit confusing. Because some areas looked really good, some areas looked unremarkable, to say the least. And my last negative. The game was brutally difficult to start. Very difficult, and levels like this one you see here, they didn't help much. This was kind of like one of the puzzle sections of the game. Parts like this just infuriated me. But I thought the game was brutally difficult to start, mainly because you didn't have your skills yet. You know, the beginning of Souls games is always hard. Always. But usually they do a generous amount of hand-holding. This game just kind of like throws you right into the frying pan. I thought they could have, you know, to contrast that with something else, the end of the game, I had like no problem whatsoever beating the final boss. None. I just beat the final boss solo, had no problems. I had known my gear so well at that point that that boss didn't stand a chance. With the beginning of the game, I was dying constantly. I thought, good God, I hope the entire game doesn't have this level of difficulty. No, somewhere around halfway through the game, once I started getting the skills that I wanted, I was able to heal better, you know, have some support and all that. The game did a complete 360. It went from being extremely difficult to being, I would say, moderately easy. So a little bit of balance would be advised. That's my review for Remnant 2. Overall, I thought the game was good. Like I said, I wanted to do a second playthrough, but I've got other shit to record. So I hope that my suggestions to improve the game actually get to one of the developers at Gunfire. If anyone that ever watches this video knows someone there, send it to them. Any input's good.